Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Neha Sakalkar, currently operating as team lead with the Arista Technical Services team. Before we begin our presentation, let me take a few minutes to talk briefly about our TAC webinar initiative. JK, can you move to the next slide, please? The primary focus of our TAC webinar series is to facilitate a live forum for knowledge sharing between TAC and our customers. In these webinars, we dive into technical topics that are found to be relevant and useful to most of our customers. Since its inception in 2022, we have covered various technical scenarios like switch health checks, latency, packet drop issues observed in layer 2, layer 3, VXLAN, EVPN environment, etc. Now for today's session, we will go over some common routing issues observed with multicast traffic traversing between two sites. Jonathan Curtis, one of our finest engineers here, will be leading the technical presentation today to demonstrate the scenarios using Arista CLI. Along with him, we also have our seasoned engineers and tech leads to address any queries raised during the session. Please feel free to use the Q&A section of the webinar to interact with us. A download link for the topology diagrams was also emailed to our registered participants early last week. If you're not on a registered list or have not yet downloaded the copy, please use this as an opportunity to download it. Our panelist has also shared a link to download the file on our webinar chat. We recommend keeping a snapshot of it handy for quick reference. JK, next slide, please. In this slide, we provide details on our upcoming webinar for Q2. We have one left on June 26, 2024, which starts at 11 a.m. US Eastern. Along with that, you can also see here the webinar registration link and the link to download or view all of our previous session recordings, content, any configurations, sample configurations, and the slide deck information on our Arista community page. Now, moving on, in addition to our TAC webinar web initiative, we also have a new product offering called Arista TAC Custom Training. With the growing interest in personalized training and the invaluable feedback provided by our customers, we have launched this training program last year. It is a fully specialized paid offering led by our TAC experts. While the scenarios covered during TAC webinar sessions are generic in nature, the TAC custom training ones will be tailored to your platform, feature, and network design requirements. It includes a comprehensive analysis of recent TAC cases associated with your account. We also review some common network issues observed in your environment, followed by key recommendations made by our TAC SMEs to prevent those issues or outages in future. The cherry on top is that the training session is provided in the form of troubleshooting scenario session. This ensures that your network operation team is ready to handle any network-related challenges that may arise in future. So far, we have received excellent feedback on both the quality and the content of the sessions from many of our Cloud Titan as well as enterprise customers. If you're interested in scheduling a session or learning more about this offering, kindly reach out to us at tac-custom-training@arista.com. Now, without further ado, let me move out the session to our presenter, JK. And JK, you can take over. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Neha. And hello to everyone joining us today. As mentioned, my name's Jonathan Curtis, or sometimes JK for short. And I'm here to continue our discussion about debugging multicast traffic. So we've got a little bit of an agenda today. It's nothing crazy. Obviously, we're going to be looking at multicast traffic issues in a network, right? We're going to be using just the CLI for today's debugging sessions. Hopefully there's some new show commands that you're not previously exposed to that'll make your lives easier, better, however you want to think about it. We're going to be building on this foundation, not just you guys as learning different things or different ways to approach problems, but also from our perspective, this whole TAC webinar series. This is the second in a series of multicast sessions. The first one was presented by my colleague Devroy. And I'm really glad to kind of take that mantle up today. The big goal and takeaway for you guys from today's session, I'm hoping anyway, is the use of multicast flags to better understand the operating state of our network, which will help us with troubleshooting any issues that arise. So I want to start with just this little snippet of, some of the common multicast flags that you'll see. I'm not going to read through all of them. We've got examples where you're going to see these in live output in just a couple of slides here. But a little bit of previous exposure, I figure, might help things along the way. So things like, your source is locally attached. Well, I would expect to see that on your first hop router. Things like wildcard entries, I'd expect to see on an RP or a last hop router, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, we'll jump into these more, but it gives you a quick opportunity to look at them before we really dive in. So I've got a bit of a reference slide here. As Neha mentioned, this series of troubleshooting scenarios came about from the concept of originally having two sites where our multicast traffic, at least, was localized to the respective sites. Now, maybe there was internet connectivity between the two, but we wouldn't be routing our multicast traffic over that anyway. So these two sites have their own RPs, they have their own sources, they have their own receivers originally. And so a migration has occurred, right? We've got some new either direct connectivity or maybe again through a service provider providing routed connectivity between the two sites. And now we can extend our multicast traffic from one site into the other. And so the first phase of this conjoining of the two sites from a multicast network perspective is to consolidate our RPs in site 2. So you'll see we go from the singular RP here at site 1 down to, or from the two RPs, sorry, one here in site 1, one here in site 2, to the singular RP down here in site 2. And maybe there's considerations for doing things like Anycast RP in the future, but this is at least step 1 of this migration. But unfortunately, we encounter some problems, and immediately following these links being brought up and the conversion to a single RP, we've got some sort of issues with various types of multicast traffic. And whenever I jump into a case like this, because this is a scenario we've very much received almost verbatim in TAC before, is starting with a single thing that we know to be true and debugging it to completion. Maybe there's multiple problems going on in the network, maybe not. But if we can isolate a single problem and debug it to a complete resolution, we'll see at least what that alleviates and kind of go from there. So to that end, we're going to focus on this SG. This is source 172.22.10.10, publishing to 226.94.11. So this source is located in site 1, and we have a receiver in site 2 that we know isn't receiving the traffic, but is expected to be able to receive the traffic. So some high-level, just generic questions that are always good to kind of figure out ahead of time, right? I mean, this could be a unicast routing problem in theory, so we have to validate, and at least here we know that that's not the case. We've got end-to-end reachability. We also know that both our source and our receiver can ping the RP. So it's not a regular unicast routing problem. We know that's fine. We also can determine if this was working before the cutover. And we get confirmation that yes, there was, this source is local to site 1. The receiver's in site 1. Before the cutover, we're receiving this traffic and are currently receiving this traffic. So those are two important bits to know. This tells us that our outage is limited to site 2, which means that should be where we start our troubleshooting. So we're going to jump right into this session, and I've got CLI on site 2, leaf 2. We're going to look at the MRAD output for our interesting group. This is one of the potential last hop routers. It's either leaf 2 or leaf 1. That's our DR for the segment. Looks like I chose right. We see not the right output. I'm terribly sorry. That is our second session. Same device, site 2, leaf 2, slightly different multicast group. We're going to be looking at the show IP mroute output for 226.94.1.1. And we see this output here. We've got a join from our receiver. That's good. So we know that at least localized IGMP is working fine. We also see that we have the SG, but we have an odd set of flags, this JPEH. And those are odd in particular because looking at our legend at the top here, our E and J flag reference forwarding on the RP tree and actively joining the SP tree. This is normal in a sense, but it shouldn't be kind of stuck in this state. You should be able to join the SP tree almost instantaneously. Our H flag is mostly just a reference flag. It tells us, we're joining the SPT due to policy. There are circumstances where maybe you wouldn't join the SPT, so it's helpful to have this flag here. And then our P flag is programmed in hardware, which just means when this switch receives traffic for this group, it'll be able to forward it out at hardware. It's not doing CPU forwarding. Everything's programmed and ready to go, but apparently our receiver is not getting it. So the first is to confirm that. We've got this show multicast fib IPv4 counters output. This is great output for this device because it tells us whether or not we're forwarding this traffic anywhere. And I can see right here, we've got 0 bytes and 0 packets in the list for this SG, which means we're not currently forwarding, and we have not forwarded any traffic for this particular SG. Now there's 2 other bits here, this Ethernet 12 and Ethernet 55.1. These are important references. I'm going to just open up show LDP really quick to make sure I know where these go. This is our RP and our other spine. Good. So what's interesting about these is our IIF of Ethernet 12. That means we're actively receiving traffic from the RP there. And I want to go check that device out first, because if we should be receiving traffic from that RP, we should be forwarding it down to our receiver. On our RP, we see the flags are S and C. Now, 2 of these are going to be mostly reference flags, at least for today's circumstance. N is may notify for MSDP, which the environment is not running right now. C means that we learned about the source from a DR via a register. So I expect to see those on our RP all the time. Our S flag tells us that the SPT bit has been set. That means that we know the receiver is trying to join the SP tree, but I can also tell from this output that we haven't successfully joined it yet. We still have an outgoing interface of Ethernet 12 towards the receiver. When the receiver successfully joins, we'll see different output here. We won't have an OIL listed. Our incoming interface will actually say register. So I know that this device should still be forwarding traffic to our receiver, and I want to check that same multicast fib IPv4 counter output. Now, unfortunately for me, looks like this command isn't working on this device, and I check the output here. And I get confirmation from the switch owner that this is supposed to be upgraded to maybe a 7280 R2 or R3, but they haven't done so yet. It's still a 7280 SE that's several years old at this point. I want to say 6 or 7 plus. So I'm going to pivot over to our other spine. And this is an okay pivot for our troubleshooting because this spine is part of our SP tree. And we know that we're trying to join the SP tree from the site 2 leaf 2 perspective, and it's not successful. But on this device, I can see we have good flags. S and P means that we're programmed in hardware for forwarding. Our outgoing interface does in fact point to this leaf switch. And this output looks great and suggests to me that as long as this device is getting the traffic, it should be forwarding it. And this device, again, confirmation is a newer hardware revision of the 7280, does support our multicast fib counter output. And I can see that we have packets here. More importantly, when rerunning the command, I can see that it's incrementing. So I know that we're actively forwarding this traffic, and I need to move my debugging back to site 2 leaf 2 because I've got the upstream device, both of them really, have outputs at least suggesting or confirming that they're forwarding traffic to this switch, but this switch isn't forwarding them downstream, and it's not joining the SP tree. So what I want to do is look at those packets. This is data plane traffic, so I need to use a monitor session to punt this traffic up to our CPU. So you can see me configuring it here, monitor session TAC. Our sources are linked to site 2 spine 1 for our SP tree, sending it to the CPU. And I'm just confirming that the programming took. I can see, yes, it is programmed in hardware. So now we're going to run our TCP dump command to look at these packets. And I can confirm that, yeah, we're definitely receiving them. That's our source. That's our group, 226.94.11, so that checks out. Packet length seems okay, 1512, but I do spot the problem. Our TTL is a 1. So since this is a routed link to site 2 spine 1, when this packet's received, we need to route it and send it down to our receiver. That's going to decrement our TTL to 0, which means that packet is no longer routable and it needs to be discarded. Since site 2, leaf 2, our last hop router, doesn't have active traffic that it can forward downstream to the receiver, since these packets are effectively invalid, it can't even successfully join the SP tree. So we're going to get this rectified. We tell the team that's responsible for publishing, and they confirm, yep, we've bumped up the TTL, and now we can see, yep, TTL's a 3. So let's go recheck all of our states, not only on this device, but on our others, and see how our flags have updated. We have our show IPM route command again. It's 226.94.1.1. And we see our flags on our last hop router are different. We see SRP. So the S flag we've talked about before, that's the SPT bit is set. Our P is our programmed in hardware. And then the R is the RPT bit is set. Those are all expected here. This device is always going to be part of our RP tree and our SP tree. Most importantly, we're on the SP tree now. We're no longer attempting to join it. We also have our IIF and our OIL look fantastic, so I would fully expect that this switch is now able to forward the traffic to our interested receiver. We're going to use our multicast fib IPv4 counter output to verify the same. And before, where we had zeros for bytes and packets here, we now have values. We know that we're forwarding. You'll also see that the old reference to Ethernet 12 being our IIF is removed. That's because we've completely joined the SP tree. Our new IIF is 55.1. And now we can go take a look at how the flags on our other devices may have changed. So we're on the RP here. This is the site 2 spine 2. We'll see this is a new set of flags for the RP, the NCE. And a little bit different from before, we see the E was the entry is forwarding on the RP tree. So that's from when this device was our forwarded, it means we were forwarding on the RP tree. The next hop device has successfully converged over to the SP tree. Most importantly, we now see that our incoming interface is now registered, and we no longer have an interface in the OIL. So we know for certain that our downstream device has successfully joined the SP tree from the RP tree. This device is no longer even receiving our multicast traffic, which is expected. Everything's converged over to site 2 spine 1, where we'll check our same show IPM route output, except on this device, I don't expect to see anything changed. And we can confirm the same. These are the same flags, S and P on site 2 spine 1. From this device's perspective, it was already doing its job. It got multicast traffic, it forwarded it downstream, everything was fine. That issue was downstream on site 2 leaf 2, who couldn't continue to forward the traffic because the TTL expired. And that wraps up the first problem from our 2 site to 1 site migration. So a little bit of a recap here, because I know that was quite a lot. Our last hop router had mRoute flags that showed it was stuck trying to join the SP tree. We also knew that it was not forwarding any traffic to the receivers. When we checked the 2 upstream devices, site 2 spine 1 and site 2 spine 2, they both had mRoute outputs indicating that they would have been forwarding traffic to our last hop router. So we went back to our last hop router to TCP dump that traffic, and that's where we saw that the packets were being received with a TTL of 1. Since that gets decremented locally, it gets discarded, it can't be routed. And we can presume, since it's the same number of hops from either of these uplink devices, that the TTL received from both site 2 spine 1 or site 2 spine 2 was always a TTL of 1 and decremented to 0, which is why, even though we were receiving the 2 streams, neither one could be forwarded. We got confirmation that once the TTL was increased, we were forwarding the packets down to our interesting receiver and could get further confirmation from the receiver itself that yes, it's now receiving those packets. And then our list of reference commands here, there's a couple additional that weren't necessarily in that CLI output, but could be helpful when you're trying to debug a similar facing problem. So something like the show IP PIM upstream joins can be fantastic to use, but didn't really have a particular use case for that scenario. Now, unfortunately for us, while we solved the TTL problem, there lingers more multicast issues in our new Site 1, Site 2 routed multicast segment. And so we've got a new source to focus on. Well, same source IP, it's still the 172.22.10.10, but it's a different group, 226.94.14. And it's time for us again to figure out our high level what sort of things do we know about this particular issue so that we can start ruling out? Well, we still know that there's no unicast routing issues. That remains true from before, right? Again, we can get confirmation that this was working in Site 1 before the cutover. We can validate if our TTL was updated after we found our original problem and get confirmation that it was. We can determine, okay, there's no receivers getting traffic in either site since the cutover. So that's an important distinction. So this is a full outage for this particular group, as compared to just the partial outage we saw when we were investigating the previous one. So let's jump right back into the CLI here. We're going to start again on Site 2, Leaf 2, only because we already have our session open there, and it's as good a place to start as any. We have an interested receiver in Site 2. So we're going to look at show IPM route for our new group, 226.94.14. And our output here is obviously very different. We have our join from the local receiver, but there's no knowledge of the SG. So this leaf would get that information from the RP. Makes sense that that's our next place to go. So we're on Site 2 spine 2. We're going to look at show IPM route for the same group, 226.94.14. And we see the same thing that we see on our last hop router. So this is very clearly wildly different, right? Again, our RP can see the join from our receiver. We know that this half of the tree is good, but we need to totally pivot. We need to go to maybe our first hop router in Site 1 and figure out why the RP doesn't know about this source. So we're on Site 1, Leaf 1. And again, I don't know which one's the DR, if it's Leaf 1 or Leaf 2. We'll just check our MRAD output. On this device, I can tell that we're not on the DR because there's no OIL. So we're jumping over to our other leaf, where we'll check our MRAD output for 226.94.14. We do have an OIL listed here, and we see it listed as register. So register is interesting. It tells us that this device is trying to register knowledge of this group with the RP, but for some reason it's unsuccessful. So again, I want to leverage TCP dump here, see if I can look at the packets and maybe identify why the registration for this group isn't going to be working correctly. And what I need to know is my next hop interface. So I'm going to check my route to 2222. There's the entry in the routing table, and I can see my next hop interface is Ethernet 51. So I can do my TCP dump on that interface, and I can filter for traffic towards 2222 and see what these packets that we're sending to the RP look like, try and figure out what the problem is. Here, I don't need to use a monitor session, by the way. This isn't data plane traffic. This is control plane because this leaf is generating this at CPU level and then forwarding it. So we can just do the TCP dump right on the interface. That said, we're not seeing any packets. So there's definitely a problem here. And the only thing I can think of is that maybe there's more than one RP configured on this device. So we're going to use this show IP PIM RP command to tell us if there are multiple, and we get that confirmation that yes, indeed there are. There's an RP 1121 and 2222. And the RP 1121, what I need to figure out next, just to validate the theory, is whether or not we chose that RP in our hash. So when you have a list of RPs, you're going to hash all groups to one RP or the other. And the show IP PIM RP hash command will confirm that for us. And we see that that is in fact true. When we input this particular group, it tells us RP1121 is the one we're going to use. Now that address, if you don't remember, it's on our original topology here, and you'll see it up here at the top in Site 1 from the pre-migration. That Site 1 Spine 1 was the original RP for Site 1 with that address. So I want to go there next, in particular because if this is a misconfig, it might be on multiple devices. And it is, in fact, on Site 1 Spine 1. We see that it also has that RP configured. So I don't know why we haven't registered it. I mean, even if it registered here, it wouldn't work. But I get confirmation of the why when I check to see our route to that IP I was looking for, what interface it was configured on. What I find out is that IP address was just completely removed from this device. So when the consolidation happened, that IP was removed because it was no longer supposed to be an RP for the two sites. And now I think I fully understand how we kind of got into this state. I want to check just to make sure on my last two devices, show IP PIM RP, do I see this same exact configuration? And on our other spine, I get confirmation. On our second leaf, I get the same. And so this makes sense to me, but I'm going to show the running configuration for what this looks like. A lot of times when we're configuring IP addresses, we sort of assume that it's a replace operation, right? Because we're used to an interface can only have one IP. And we've seen the same expectation when configuring an RP address under this router PIM sparse mode. Unfortunately, in this case, RPs, well, you can have multiple. There's Anycast solutions, there's MSDP we've made reference to previously. And so this is actually a list of available RPs that can be used. And then you hash to a particular one. We can figure out that hash based off our earlier show command. So we know the problem. It's time to fix it. I'm broadcasting these commands out to my 4 sessions here to all of the routers that are in Site 1. We're just going to go into this router PIM sparse mode, IPv4, delete out this bad RP address 1121. And this should correct all of our issues. So now we get to confirm the same. We're going to use our show IPMRED output across the board and see what the new state looks like on our respective devices. So starting with our first hop router, 226.94.1.4 is our group, and this looks much better. I can see our IAF is good. Our OIL has a populated interface. The flags are SLP, which is what I would expect from our first hop router. We've got our locally attached. We're on the SP tree. We're programmed in hardware. Jumping over to our RP in Site 2, we see the same NCE flags here that we saw after we fixed our TTL issue in problem 1. So this is, again, expected. This is a good set of behavior for this particular group on our RP. What it means is that our other spine must be part of the SP tree. So we want to confirm here with our show IPM route, and we would expect the same SP flags. Yep, perfect. So this device, again, should be getting this traffic from Site 1, forwarding it down to Site 2, leaf 2, where we have our final confirmation to make sure that this should be working and that everything's programmed correctly on our routers in the network. Same flags here of SRP. When I say the same, referring to previous problem after we fixed the issue. Everything looks great. We get confirmation that our receiver is now able to pick up on this traffic as well. And so again, a lot of information to cover pretty quickly. So a bit of a summary. When we started debugging this problem, we went to our LHR first, and we saw that both it and the RP had no knowledge of this SG. Our first hop router showed a register in the OIL, and when we used TCP dump filtering on packets sent to the RP, we didn't see any packets. When we jumped over to our RP configuration, or our show IP PIM RP, that output showed that there were 2 RPs configured, and that our RP hash output, CLI output, did confirm that this group was trying to be registered to a different RP 1121. When we moved to the device where that was originally configured, we found out that that address was completely removed and there is no Anycast solution here. We shouldn't have multiple RPs configured in Site 1. It seems like this was an easy misconfig. We just did an RP address 2222 on the 4 devices, and it added to our RP list instead of replacing the existing 1121. Once we rectified the configuration issue, we verified everything was resolved. And again, we've got some helpful reference commands over on the right there with that show IP PIM RP and the RP hash. But there's always more reference material in general. So our Troubleshooting Multicast up at the top here, that is a link to an article on Arista Community Central. Has a whole bunch of scenarios outside of a little bit, including of some of the things I've talked about today, but so much more than that as well. It's a great read. Our multicast counter is the second link here. That's a kickback to our first video where we had the show multicast fib IPv4 counter output. So this link will actually give you a list of what platforms support the command. And in some cases, you might need additional configuration on the device to get these particular counters working. So if you're running multicasts in your network and you're trying to figure out why you're getting that same NA, this is a great solution. Link to PIM in general. There's a whole bunch of great stuff on PIM. As well as links to MSDP. We didn't specifically talk about it today, but we alluded to the possibility that maybe an Anycast or MSDP solution for multiple RPs would be applicable in a scenario like this. So if you want to read up more on that, there's links there. And then this last one is publishing very soon, courtesy of TAC Upasana. She's got a great article actually on understanding multicast flags better. So very relevant to what we're talking about today. And with that, Neha, I think I get to kick things back over to you.
Thank you, JK. That was an amazing session. We hope that the session was beneficial to all of our attendees as well. Recording of today's session will be shared on our Arista community page shortly. Other than the material referenced by JK on the slide deck, our community page also includes a wide variety of articles on other technologies written by our in-house experts. And for our new customers, we have added some useful videos related to initial onboarding and FRU replacements on our Arista YouTube community page. Feel free to leverage our knowledge base for gaining additional insights on our platforms and feature sets. Moving on, the next session for the 2024 series is scheduled next month on June 26th at 11 a.m. US Eastern. We are also including a link to a feedback form for today's session in the chat window. Please take a moment to share your feedback as it assists us in selecting topics for future webinars. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you back on our next webinar. Have a wonderful day ahead.